In July 2022, the THAT chapter interlude teaser, A Winter Night's Lazzo, was released, and during that week or even that month, I struggled to escape from hearing people, just swoon over the Fantui harbingers of all people. Many of my friends became strongly attracted to Pantalone, Dottore, Arlecchino, and Columbina, and this is aside from those people who were already utterly in love with Child and Scaramouche long before the teaser dropped. I understand that evil fictional characters do have a certain appeal that morally upright characters just can't emulate, from their shamelessness to their schemingness and even their gothic drip. I personally am not really fond of evil characters, but I can sorta conceptually understand why people would find them entertaining. So obviously, when you're really passionate about an evil character because of how messed up they are, and you consider them your evil little meow meow, nothing they do can really faze you. If you like Child, then murder is part of his charm. If you like Columbina, her creepiness is intriguing, and if you like Dottore, then his gravely unethical scientific experiments only make him more fun. But the thing is, if you like a character that's normally pleasant and helpful, who cares a lot about other people in general, and this person does something undoubtedly immoral, you can't help but just oof, because their actions come across as somewhat jarring and disturbing, and you might start to get a weird feeling about liking this character. Although, of course, that feeling only lasts for 30 minutes max, and you can go back to declaring your undying love for them again, and that's totally fine. With me, when it comes to my enjoyment of Kaeya, it's not that strongly affected by the way he injured Collei through a physical confrontation in the webtoon, cause we Kaeya fans all know that he had his reasons for doing this. However, with that being said, I personally can't help but feel like I'm brushing off his wrongdoings just because I've been a loyal and diehard simp since day one. Of course, this is by no means a sentiment that most Kaeya fans would carry, it's just me. And I also know that the fictional characters you like are not reflections of your own morality in real life. The reason why I feel sort of weird about this incident in the webtoon is not because it made me want to unstan Kaeya, but I find the situation so complex, and I think the conversations surrounding it haven't been all that deep. Of course, it's just fiction, so we don't need to come up with a conclusive stance on these characters. It's not like we need to come up with a verdict on whether or not we should punish them and by how much. But that doesn't mean we can't thoroughly discuss the ethical concerns regarding fictional characters' actions, because these scenarios are good ways for us to explore various ethical perspectives and train us to analyze complex ethical situations in real life. That's why later on, I'll try to relate this Kaeya-Collei conversation to a certain social issue from my country of origin, although the issue is a bit outdated. But before I go into that, I want to say that this is not going to be a Kaeya defense video, because it's important to touch on Collei's feelings regarding the incident too, and in fact I will be splitting the video into a Kaeya analysis and a Collei analysis, because it's important to look into all parties in this sort of ethical case study. Although I don't think this is much of a fandom discourse thing, because I haven't seen tons of Collei fans being mad at Kaeya or Kaeya fans being overly defensive of him, which is good. Let's keep it this way. My objective is not to put blame on either party, but to examine the circumstances which contributed to the moral and or ethical decisions made in that scene, and the implications of these on both characters' personalities and their lives moving forward. However, I will put out the disclaimer that it's likely that I'll have a lot more to say about Kaeya, because I'm very well versed at analyzing him, and he's also been in the plot for much longer, whereas Collei only became playable in August. But aside from that, I haven't really thought about Collei much as a character just because of my own preferences, so I might honestly lack things to say about her, but I really am going to put the effort into saying something worthwhile about her. And as for my title, I will get into explaining that later, so it's not just clickbait, don't worry. So with that, I hope you guys will look forward to my analysis of these two characters, and I hope that what I will say will end up being thought-provoking enough. Anyway, let's get on to the main content of this video, starting with my thoughts on Kaeya's character in relation to the confrontation incident, and then following that up with an analysis of Collei. I know I said earlier that I wouldn't be blaming anyone, but what I meant is more of like, I don't want to vilify the people involved. However, I will make it clear that it was wrong for Kaeya to corner and confront Collei in such a combative manner, because that meant that he was harming a child. So when I'm trying to explain why Kaeya must have done that, it's not to justify his actions, but really just to examine them further. I've seen some people say that he acted this way because he saw himself in Collei and whatnot, but I feel like there's also more to it than just that, and that's something I'd really like to explore. Some important questions to ask here are, what drives a person to act immorally even though they don't do evil things on a regular basis? And how much do these things impact a person's character? Like in Kaeya's case, does this rather violent confrontation of Collei taint his character as a whole? The thing is, it's true that we can establish a strong link between Kaeya's current attitude and his upbringing. We know that he's a scion of a dead, vengeful nation, and he was exposed to a certain amount of indoctrination at a young age and left in Mondstadt to fulfill a certain purpose. By indoctrination, I wouldn't say that his dad was necessarily brainwashing him, but he had to reveal lots of heavy things to his son, who was still seemingly very young at the time, and the knowledge of that was quite burdensome to bear. As for Kaeya being abandoned in Mondstadt, we can't discern exactly what the plan for him was. Some people say he's a spy, but I personally don't think it's likely since it doesn't seem like he's reporting to anyone. It could even be more of a passive role that was set up for him, like he just has to stay put until he's called to do something important in the future. Regardless of the nature of this plan, the point is he was made to be aware of the dark realities of the world at a very young age. So now, it's possible that he developed a view of the world wherein he assumes that there's often something malicious lurking beneath the surface. Some other people who grew up almost only encountering acts of kindness from others are more likely to assume that most other people are inherently good, but Kaeya knows that this assumption is incorrect. However, it's not like Kaeya readily believes other people are evil. Of course not. Lots of his voice lines about the other playable characters have a positive ring to them. So it's not like he's jumping to conclusions about people's evil nature, but instead, he's refined his intuition over the years as his arrest numbers grew. A tool that also aids him in sensing other people's malicious intentions seems to be self-referencing. His first character story shares with us one of his quotes, which states, "Everyone's got a secret, but not everyone knows what to do with it." I'm not entirely sure, but this reminds me of the saying, "It takes one to know one." And so part of the reason he's able to identify wrongdoers is because he has also a keen understanding of his own capacity for wickedness. That's not to say that Kaeya is evil, far from it. But what I'm saying is he seems very aware of the ways in which he could engage in evil acts if he wanted to. I think that's why he refers to himself as an anti-hero with attitude problems. I feel like this concept sends the message that good and evil people may be on opposite sides, but their characteristics and personalities might not necessarily be as different as one would think. Two sides of the same coin, as some would say. And so, going into Collei's case, most people wouldn't really suspect a young girl to possess malicious intentions because our usual idea of children is that they are innocent and barely capable of high levels of criminality. However, Kaeya knows from personal experience that even children are capable of surprisingly immoral things, such as in his case in Collei's deception. So if Kaeya was capable of deception as a child, even all the way until now, that means it's also possible for some other children to be capable of deception and destruction. If you think about it, he was right about Collei being a quote-unquote perpetrator behind the destruction of the carriage due to the black fire. His intuition was rather spot on in that case because he knows how it's like to be in that situation. And yet his line of thinking was so unique because no one else was willing to suspect Collei, but he did, and his theory was proven to be correct, thus validating his assumption of there being evil lurking in unexpected places. The problem with what he did lies in how he addressed Collei's behavior, because while it was true that she was behind the deaths of some Fatui envoys, he seemed to punish her too harshly, and this results from a wrong assessment of her level of blameworthiness. Because to consider someone as fully guilty of a certain crime, you have to believe that they had fully intended for it to happen. This is what I mean when I say that the explanation of Kaeya seeing himself in Collei is insufficient. I understand what that means, but the phrasing might make it sound like Kaeya acted on impulse because he was triggered by Collei's behavior due to self-loathing. The thing is, to me, it didn't seem like he was acting impulsively because his actions were very calculated. He first wanted to expose Collei's secret by putting her in a stressful situation that would unleash her Archon residue so that his speculation could be confirmed. Then after this, he went on to cornering and hurting her slowly but very deliberately and methodically. So this whole fight scene was premeditated to some degree, and again, I personally believe that this stems from his assessment of Collei's culpability, and he decided beforehand that this is the proper way to make her accountable for her wrongdoings, or simply speaking, to quote-unquote punish her. However, we know that Collei wouldn't really have done this completely out of her own will if not for the Archon residue, but at the same time, the effects it had on her made her tap into her inner demons, which seemed to be convincing her to unleash her anger on certain targets. So on some level, it's not like Collei is completely innocent because her own emotional instability unleashed the Archon residue. But at the same time, if you really look into her true desires, then it seems like when she focuses hard on thinking about what she really wants, you can tell that she doesn't want to harm other people. This is something that Kaeya failed to consider, and there's also some more explanation behind that. I feel like there's lots of people nowadays who, when you call them out on their questionable actions from when they were young, they would apologize but also imply that they don't remember why they did that in the past, using the excuse that children are immature and don't really know what they're doing. The thing with Kaeya is, I believe that he doesn't think this way at all. He's very observant and analytical, allowing him to dissect the motivations of other people as well as himself. I can be like that too to some degree, and while the self-awareness is generally good, the feeling can be rather creepy because you end up peering into yourself as if you're another person, and the amount of information you have on yourself can also prove to be burdensome in some cases. So what I'm trying to say is Kaeya probably still remembers his own thought process from when he was much younger, so it might be hard for him to distance himself from that. Of course, this is rather speculative, but I kinda based this idea on his general personality as well as the notes he kept in that brick of his apartment in the Favonius headquarters. We got to access these during Hidden Strife, which was the event dedicated to Diluc's skin. He has a copy of the doctrines that his father taught him how to write, and he also has some commentary on that, and his memory of his father's demeanor back then makes it clear that he's still able to remember a lot of his own thoughts from when he was a child, but he's now able to articulate them much better. I don't know yet what Kaeya's father tasked him to do exactly back then, but one sort of immoral act that we can tie back to his childhood is his decision to deceive the Ragnvinter family and the rest of Mondstadt by concealing his true identity. I think Kaeya probably looks back at his child self and thinks about the many ways in which that child could have decided differently. He's not one to make excuses for his younger self by saying that he didn't know anything back then, when he probably remembers his child self being fully cognizant of what he was doing. so it makes it difficult for him to forgive his younger self. Another thing that complicates this matter is the fact that Kaeya's deception has been continuous from his childhood even until now, so there's a very strong tie between his quote-unquote sins back then and his current sins, which is why he can't just go to Twitter and write a half-assed apology about how he's not at all the same person that he was 10 years ago, or something like that. And the thing is, Kaeya is not only cognizant of his wrongdoings, but he also has a very strong conscience, while at the same time not being able to meet the demands of that very conscience due to pressures from his own circumstances. So that results in a very strong sense of guilt that's harsh and unforgiving because he understands how wrong his actions are while not making any excuses for himself. At the same time, however, I don't want to exactly say that, OMG, poor baby Kaeya, self-loathing, my poor little baby, because I don't think that he pities himself a lot really. Instead, he seems to try to use his self-awareness to be as honest with himself as possible, describing his own nature by claiming stuff like being an anti-hero with attitude problems, like I said earlier. So he's seemingly trying to accept this harsh judgment of himself as just a matter of fact and continues to live life with this burdensome knowledge of himself while he's trying to compensate for it in some ways. But what he doesn't see is that it's also erroneous for him to overestimate his culpability as a child, because when you're younger, of course, you're still developing and you're quite vulnerable, so parental pressure is difficult to escape. Also, children aren't supposed to be self-sacrificial yet at that age because their survival instinct is very raw due to their desire to live for longer and grow up. So obviously, it's very difficult for a child to act in accordance with their conscience even though they might have a mature understanding of what's right and wrong. So yes, Kaeya should feel bad for starting to deceive people from a young age, but the degree to which he should feel ashamed for this is most likely exaggerated. The thing about Kaeya's guilt is that it's not entirely a bad thing. Again, it's an indicator of the strength of his conscience and his desire to act morally, and can serve as a self-correcting mechanism in the future. The problem is, like I said, he overestimates how guilty he should feel to the point that it's very difficult for him to appease his conscience at this point, which might be why he turned to being violent towards Collei, because subconsciously he might have felt that this would be a way to right his wrongs from the past. Essentially, it can be considered some kind of overcompensation. If he better understood the external factors which made it difficult for him to act morally as a child, then he could have also applied that knowledge to better empathize with Collei. I think his case is a very interesting cautionary tale regarding the use of guilt as a self-correcting mechanism. Of course, guilt is an emotion that naturally arises, but I think it can also sometimes be weaponized by others and even ourselves to make us act properly, like tools to whip us into shape or something like that. But Kaeya's confrontation of Collei shows us that guilt, when used as a tool, doesn't always produce the desired effects on yourself, so it's important to really manage it and make sure that it doesn't do too much harm to yourself and others. If guilt is like a knife, then you have to only let it poke you or graze it a bit. You can't allow it to really stab you. Not sure if that analogy works, but I hope it drives home the point a little bit. I think a lot of us Kaeya enjoyers really see Kaeya as soft and sweet and deserving of lots of love, and we kinda hope that if enough people give him validation, then he'll start to heal, and that would make him reduce his negative emotions and feel less guilty about his past actions or even his own origins. But the thing is, it's not really as simple as that, and the process towards recovery for someone like Kaeya is not just emotional but also cognitive. I feel like for him, he really has to cognitively understand why he should view himself as a good person and why he should tone down his feelings of guilt, because him thinking about it can better translate it to him gaining proper insights and realizations. And I don't think that's the case only for Kaeya, but people in general. But of course, he can't just willingly decide to change his perspective on himself and the world unprompted, because that's very difficult to do. What needs to happen is there should be more instances of people implicitly showing him pieces of evidence to convince him to allow himself to breathe a little bit more. This might have been a gradual process that had already occurred since the events in the webtoon, especially with Diluc accepting the vase Kaeya gave him and the vision contained inside it. Something as simple as that can signify Diluc's acceptance of Kaeya's kind actions, and so that can serve as concrete evidence that may help influence Kaeya's understanding of himself. Little things like this might have piled up already, which is why Kaeya in-game seems teeny bit calmer and less troubled compared to his webtoon version, I think. And with that, he seems a lot less likely to corner a child with ice walls now. So, now that we've discussed Kaeya's side, as I promised, I will devote some time to discussing Collei's perspective regarding the issue. I'm glad that people understand that she's innocent when it comes to the issue of being cornered by Kaeya, even though she was the one who killed those Fatui diplomats with her Archon residue. I haven't heard people say that she deserved that treatment because she's a criminal, so that's good. But still, I think Collei bears some level of guilt because as Kaeya confronted her, she mentioned that she'd be willing to have herself killed as punishment, although at the same time she also viewed it as liberation from her suffering. This is something that managed to make Kaeya stop in his tracks, even though he was also very intent on punishing her heavily at that time. However, her guilt isn't only palpable in that scenario, but also in her voice line where she says that she wanted to go back to Mondstadt and apologize for what she did back then. Of course, I don't want Collei to end up feeling too ashamed of herself because there were also lots of external factors that compromised her ability to act ethically all the time. But I'm glad that Collei is aware of her mistakes in such a way that would allow her to improve herself in the future. Obviously, Collei is still nervous about the idea of meeting Kaeya right now, but I would like to sort of propose a different reason for why that could be the case. Of course, she's partially afraid of him because, well, he hurt her and traumatized her, but I think that's not the only reason why she feels uneasy remembering him. I think part of it is also the fact that she was intimidated by the weight of Kaeya's perception of her. When the traveler asked about how she was like before she came to Sumeru, she told them to ask Amber for the details, but she's afraid of Kaeya finding out. To me, it seems like she's afraid of Kaeya weighing in and telling the traveler about Collei's story because he has the most insight into Collei's wrongdoings. Collei might be afraid of having her feelings of guilt triggered by Kaeya because he was really the first one to see through her, and that level of perception can be very intimidating, and I think she understands that. She does seem to be moving on from her past, but certain reminders that her past is unerasable still make her anxious, for good reason. I think she really does regret some of her mistakes from the past, and I don't think she's trying to forget all of them exactly, but she wants to stop letting them define her. This could be her way of setting boundaries and taking precautions so that she wouldn't end up spiraling into a guilt-ridden despair. But at the same time, her anticipation of Kaeya's perceptive eye boring into her soul does cause her some anxiety, which is perfectly normal. I mean, I get anxious for more shallow reasons. But I wonder if there's a way for her to find a way to manage her anxiety around that. But I would say there's no pressure for her to do that right now because it might come naturally as she grows up even more. I think this analysis sort of implies that Collei and Kaeya are like mirrors of each other, since both of them had rough pasts, have engaged in some level of deception, are experiencing some level of guilt, and are finding a path towards healing. But do take note that they're also very different in a lot of ways, and in my opinion, it's not just because of differences in how they grew up, but also because of their very different personalities. Perhaps one could argue that Collei is nicer and more agreeable than Kaeya because she's now able to grow up in a loving environment and she has no more secrets to hide, whereas Kaeya is still keeping the truth from everyone and also lost Crepus, who he cared about dearly. While on one hand that is true to some degree, I do feel like their personalities are still very different in the sense that Kaeya is more analytical and tries to find ways to gain control over social interactions, where Collei doesn't seem to have a tendency to overthink. That's not meant to disparage Kaeya in any way. I mean, that's the very reason why I like him and why I don't feel that close to Collei, simply because of relatability concerns. I just relate more to Kaeya, but that's not an indication of who's objectively better written or something like that. My take is just that if Collei were to end up becoming part of the Ragnvinder household, she'd really try to work hard and become very dedicated to what she does as a method of compensation. If Kaeya were to end up in Gandharvaville, he might still become a very intense people watcher and maybe even eavesdrop on some conversations between patients and their visitors so that it'll help him have a better grasp of human interactions and how to blend in with others more. Kaeya's also very much into analyzing power dynamics between people, I think, so that might have still been retained even if he grew up under different circumstances. These nuances are very interesting to me because it highlights both the similarities between people's struggles with coping, but also the individual personality differences that interact closely with our backgrounds. I think this realization helps us to empathize with others better because I must admit I often have this mistake of self-referencing when I try to put myself in other people's shoes. Sometimes I wonder why people can't cope with their struggles like I do, or why they're still taking time to improve when I have already, or vice versa. Things like that. But when I remember that I can't always rely on my own attitudes and behaviors as a benchmark for analyzing other people, even if we come from similar backgrounds, I begin to understand their perspectives a bit more. And character analysis is a good place to practice this skill. What I really love about the talent mats in Sumeru is that the terms admonition, ingenuity, and praxis really appropriately describe the characters who use those mats. Collei is a praxis mats user, and this is evident in how she practices her skills as her way of working towards self-improvement. The reason why she's so diligent even with learning how to read and write and identify plants in the forest is because she knows that this will not only improve her knowledge but also her character. This really highlights the process aspect of healing, where you need to put in the effort into becoming a better person. Of course, this is done by nearly everyone seeking self-improvement, but with Collei, she really has developed the proper attitude to go through this process because she's always attentive to the necessary points for improvement that she needs to consider. She doesn't seem consistently hung up on her mistakes even though she's embarrassed by them, and she's very determined to find a way to make progress even to a small degree. She exhibits a strong desire to learn, and that's very important in the Nation of Wisdom, and this learning can be extended to all aspects of her life aside from intellectual pursuits. Perhaps this is also what teaches her how to understand and manage her emotions better. Ultimately, I think that it's this attitude of hers that likely explains why she has a vision in the first place. Now, we've established that Collei is appropriately equipped to improve her life and flourish as she grows up. That's why it's the perfect time for her to visit Mondstadt again as a changed person. I hope that in the near future we can see clear signs of her improvement, such as her vocabulary expanding or her being able to do more math and identify more plants. Another interesting development would be for her to speak more confidently and even learn how to lead a team of forest rangers so that she can also understand how she's able to positively influence the people around her. I believe that all of these are destined for her because she's already laying out the foundations for these important personal developments. as early as now, so she could become a force to be reckoned with in her mid-20s. Going back to the title of this video, yes, I do think that it would be interesting if Kaeya and Collei were to meet again, not so that Collei would feel traumatized again, and also I don't want to force a reconciliation because it's not necessary for Collei to outright tell Kaeya she forgives him or something of the sort. The forgiveness narrative may be heartwarming, but it doesn't need to always be done in such a high and mighty way where it's like you forget all of the other person's offenses against you, because that just doesn't feel realistic. The reason why I want Collei to meet Kaeya again is because I want her to be able to face him confidently one day and manage her anxiety regarding being perceived in a certain way. This way, she would be able to demonstrate more self-understanding that will not be prone to influence by other seemingly dominating forces. Of course, I know it won't be easy for Collei to achieve, but I think small amounts of exposure to Kaeya might help her get over some of her fears, and over time, I hope she would realize that she's really the only one who can define her identity. Maybe one day she can even have several comebacks to Kaeya's teasing, who knows? Now, the thing is, analyzing fictional characters for its own sake is definitely a lot of fun, but it might be more relevant if we extend our understanding to real-life situations. As I was thinking about the issue of Collei and Kaeya, I was reminded that back in 2019, Filipino legislators wanted to lower the minimum age of criminal responsibility to 12 years old from 15 years old because they were arguing that some adults use children to commit crimes so that they won't get punished. The common scenario cited was drug dealing, if I remember correctly. Now, obviously, that's a load of BS because, these are children. They need guidance, not punishment, because they're not completely aware of what they're doing yet. I do want to say, however, that we should recognize children's capacity to make moral and ethical decisions because children have the ability to learn these things from the adults they talk to and the media they engage in. Kids are even taught things like helping the elderly cross the road, even though adults sometimes forget that that's a thing we're supposed to do, right? So I'm not going to dismiss children's ability to understand right and wrong completely, but as we have seen from the cases of Kaeya and Collei, children might understand what's right and wrong, but the people around them make it very difficult for them to act according to their conscience. They're very vulnerable at that age, so it's hard for them to run away from home because their parents want them to do illegal stuff. They're not at that age where they can stand up to adults and go against them, especially because parents or other adults who would instruct children to engage in criminal activities are already likely to hurt them in the first place. In Kaeya's case, at a young age, he couldn't just go around confessing to people that he was from Kaeya and was tasked to do something major, because I doubt that he could fend for himself properly at that age and could risk running into a lot of danger if he's not able to find a home to stay in. As for Collei, just imagine trying to act ethically when there are demons talking to you. That's insane. And like Kaeya, she needed to deceive people to find a cure for herself because she's not old enough or literate enough to figure it out herself. So when it comes to kids in real life, it's also kinda like that. It's easy enough for them to do simple good deeds, but dealing with moral dilemmas can prove to be very difficult for them because they have tons of things to consider that we adults might not need to worry about anymore. As it is, we adults already struggle with certain moral dilemmas which we can't decide on automatically. So imagine having to expect children to make the perfect moral decisions and act according to them. It's just too much to expect from them. Aside from this, I also already discussed the effects excessive guilt might have on an individual, such as with Kaeya's case, and so imagine tagging real-life children as guilty is gonna mess them up a lot. And that's not what you want to do to these people who will be engaging in active citizenship in the future. You do not want them to get the wrong ideas about guilt, justice, and society because they were held criminally liable at a young age. Luckily, my country didn't end up pushing through with this harebrained scheme. However, lots of other stupid laws have been passed already, so please do wish us the best of luck. Anyway, so that's it for my analysis of Collei and Kaeya in relation to that scene in the webtoon. It's interesting that lots of insights can be generated practically from one scene alone, and I hope that you guys learned a lot from today. Since this is a topic which requires lots of reflection, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section so that our discourse can expand productively. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll catch you in my next video. If you want to be there during its release, why not subscribe to my channel so you'll be updated with the kinds of content that would interest you. Again, that's all for today and I'll see you next time.